The lighthouse beam cuts through darkness like memory through time, relentless, revealing, inescapable. Some say war ends when the guns fall silent. They're wrong. In the shadows of Harbor View, Maine, an old woman climbs weathered stairs each night to light a beacon no ships need anymore. Her arthritic hands maintain what others have forgotten, a promise made 4 decades ago in blood-soaked jungle half a world away. They're coming for her now. Motorcycles growl in the distance like approaching thunder. Leather-clad men with hatred in their eyes and weapons beneath their jackets. The past has returned to collect its debt. The choices made in war never truly die. They merely wait, patient as the tide inevitable as dawn, for their echoes to reach across generations. Tonight, in this quiet coastal town where tourists photograph sunsets and locals guard ancient grudges, those echoes will finally break upon the shore. Some wounds never heal, some lights never fade, some battles never end. Until tonight. The lighthouse stood sentinel against the darkening sky, its white paint peeling like an old soldier's forgotten medals. Eleanor Matthews Ellie, to the few who still remembered her real name, climbed the spiral staircase with practiced determination. Each step sent pain shooting through her arthritic knees, but after 72 years of life's battles, physical discomfort was merely background noise. She reached the lamp room as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the restless Atlantic. Harbor View, Maine spread beneath her, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the rocky coastline like barnacles to a ship's hull. From this height, the fishing town looked peaceful, beautiful even. But Ellie knew better than most how deceptive surface appearances could be. Her gnarled fingers moved with surprising dexterity, checking the ancient lighthouse mechanism that hadn't guided a single ship in over 30 years. Still, she maintained it, religiously wiping each brass fitting until it gleamed, refilling the oil reservoirs that would never run dry. Another day, another promise kept, she whispered to the empty air. The light blazed to life, sending its steady beam out across waters now navigated by GPS and satellites. The town council had tried to decommission the lighthouse twice in the past decade. Both times, Ellie had fought with unexpected ferocity, appearing at town meetings with decades-old maritime charts and naval regulations until they relented. Let them think she was just another stubborn old woman clinging to the past. The truth was far more complicated and far more painful. Ellie lingered, watching the light sweep across the churning waters. Something in the air felt different tonight. A heaviness, a pressure like the atmosphere before a storm breaks. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling. After all she'd survived, superstition seemed foolish. As she descended the spiral staircase, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Few people had her number. Fewer still would call at this hour. "Dr. Matthews?" she answered, using the title she rarely claimed anymore. "Ellie, it's Frank." The gruff voice belonged to her oldest friend in Harborview, a man who, like her, carried visible and invisible wounds from a war most Americans preferred to forget. "You need to come down to the store. There's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" A pause stretched between them. "The kind that wears leather and demands protection money." "Again," she sighed, her breath fogging in the cool evening air. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Make it 5. The line went dead. Ellie pocketed her phone and quickened her pace, ignoring the protest from her aging joints. The narrow path from the lighthouse to the main road was treacherous in the fading light, but she knew every route and stone by heart. Her ancient Jeep Cherokee started with a rattling cough. Like its owner, the vehicle had long outlived its expected lifespan through sheer stubbornness and regular maintenance. The headlights cut through gathering fog as she drove toward town, the lighthouse beams sweeping overhead in rhythmic pulses. Frank's General Store stood at the junction where Harbor Street met the coastal highway. The building dated back to the 1800s, its wooden facade weathered by 2 centuries of nor'easters and salt air. Unlike many businesses in town, Frank had resisted the urge to quaintify his store for summer tourists. No nautical-themed decorations or overpriced lobster souvenirs. Just essential supplies and honest prices. Ellie parked across the street, taking in the scene before entering. 5 motorcycles gleamed under the store's exterior lights, massive machines with extended front forks and matte black finishes. Each bore the same insignia, a snarling wolf's head surrounded by a crescent moon. The Midnight Wolves. Their presence in Harborview had grown from occasional sightings to a persistent threat over the past month. She straightened her plain navy cardigan and stepped from the jeep. Age had bent her frame, but not her spine. She walked with the straight-back posture of someone who had carried wounded men through jungle terrain under heavy fire. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Conversation stopped. Frank stood behind the counter, his right sleeve pinned neatly where his arm should have been. His weathered face was impassive, but Ellie could read the tension in his jawline. Four men in leather jackets were spread throughout the store, their presence overwhelming the small space. The fifth man, clearly their leader, leaned against the counter. He was younger than the others, perhaps mid-30s with close-cropped dark hair and the lean, coiled physique of a natural fighter. His leather jacket, unlike the others, bore additional patches and insignia of military origin. Stolen valor, Ellie noted immediately. No real soldier would mix service ribbons so carelessly. "Well, well," the man said, straightening. "Look who's joined our little negotiation. The lighthouse keeper." The way he said it carried unmistakable mockery. "Ryan," Frank said, his voice carrying a warning. "We were just concluding our business." "Were we?" Ryan Razor, as his patch declared, turned back to Frank. "Because I don't recall reaching an agreement on our new community safety fee." "It doubled from last week," Frank replied flatly. "Inflation's a bitch, old man." Ryan's smile didn't reach his eyes, cold assessing, and filled with a contempt that seemed to transcend their current interaction. "Better pay up unless you want to test how well you can put out fires with one arm." Ellie stepped forward. "That's enough." The four other men exchanged glances, amused by the confrontation brewing between their leader and this elderly woman. Ryan turned slowly, sizing her up with a dismissive gaze. "Dr. Eleanor Matthews," he said, pronouncing each syllable with deliberate precision. "The angel of the battlefield, the miracle worker." His voice dripped with venom. "That's what they called you right during the war." The familiar constriction gripped Ellie's chest, the tightness that always preceded the memories she fought daily to contain. But her expression betrayed nothing. "I'm simply a retired nurse who'd like to buy milk without witnessing extortion," she replied evenly. "Frank, put a gallon on my tab, please." Ryan stepped directly into her path. Up close, she could see the network of faint scars across his face, shrapnel marks perhaps, or the aftermath of a bad accident. But it was his eyes that held her attention, dark pools of barely contained rage. "You people make me sick," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Playing hero in your golden years, acting like time erases debt. Step aside, young man." "You know what I think?" Ryan continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I think people like you, the ones who sent better men to die, and then came home to comfortable lives, I think you should be reminded every single day of what you did." His voice had risen, drawing the attention of everyone in the store. Ellie met his gaze without flinching. "Whatever grievance you think you have with me, think," Ryan's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "I don't think Dr. Matthews. I know. You're the kind of person who killed my father with your selfish choices." The accusation hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Ellie couldn't yet decipher. Before she could respond, Frank intervened. "That's enough, Ryan. Take your money and go." Ryan's eyes never left Ellie's face. "We're not done, old woman. Not by a long shot." He snatched the envelope from the counter and nodded to his men. "Pleasure doing business with you, Frank. We'll see you next week. Same time, same amount." The roar of motorcycles filled the night as they departed, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Frank moved from behind the counter, flipping the open sign to closed with a decisive motion. "You shouldn't have come, Ellie. And let you face them alone." She shook her head. "What happened to calling Sheriff Dawson?" Frank's laugh held no humor. "Dawson's a summer cop. He was more concerned about disturbing the peace than stopping extortion." He gestured toward the back room. "Come on, coffee's still hot." The back office was cramped but orderly, filing cabinets, a desk piled with invoices, and a small refrigerator humming in the corner. Frank poured coffee from a thermos into two chipped mugs, with the Marine Corps emblem faded by countless washings. "How long has Ryan been targeting you?" Ellie asked, warming her hands around the mug. "3 weeks. Started small, $50 for neighborhood safety. Now he's up to 500. Pirai." Frank lowered himself into his chair with the careful movements of a man navigating constant pain. "But it's not really about the money." "No," Ellie agreed. "It's personal for him. What did he mean about his father?" Frank studied her face. You really don't know who he is. Should I? Ryan Blackwood. His father was Lieutenant Michael Blackwood. The name hit Ellie like physical blow. The coffee mug slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor. That's not possible, she whispered. Michael didn't have children. Frank's expression softened with rare compassion. He had a son with a Vietnamese woman. The boy was 5 when Saigon fell. Memories surged unbidden, the deafening thump of helicopter rotors, the smell of jungle rot and diesel fuel. A man's face contorted in agony as she made the impossible choice of who would fit in the evacuation chopper. How did he get out? Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Michael's friend smuggled the boy onto one of the last flights. Ryan grew up in the system here, bounced around until he aged out, then joined a gang instead of the military. Frank paused. He found out who his father was about 10 years ago. Been building his hatred ever since. Ellie stared at the scattered ceramic shards, seeing instead the broken pieces of a history she'd thought safely buried. He blames me for his father's death. He needs someone to blame, Frank corrected. And you're a convenient target. She rose stiffly. I should go. Ellie, Frank hesitated. Ryan isn't just another angry young man with a chip on his shoulder. He's dangerous. The wolves are into something bigger than petty extortion. What do you mean, weapons, hard drugs? There are rumors they're connecting with some real extremists, the kind that want to watch the world burn. Frank's weathered face was grim. I've seen his type before, in country. Men who find purpose in destruction because they've forgotten how to build. I'll be careful, she promised, though they both recognized the empty words for what they were. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the beam from her lighthouse into diffuse glow. Ellie drove home slowly, her mind replaying fragments of a day she'd spent 40 years trying to forget. The cottage beside the lighthouse was small but sufficient. Ellie had never needed much space, not after losing the people who should have filled a home with noise and life. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, checking locks, drawing curtains, setting a kettle to boil. Her hands trembled as she reached for the highest cabinet in her kitchen. Behind boxes of tea and rarely used baking supplies was a small wooden box, its brass clasp tarnished with age. She placed it on the table, staring at it for long minutes before finding the courage to open it. Inside lay the fragments of a life-interrupted dog tags crusted with decades-old blood, a folded letter on military stationery, photographs curled at the edges, and a small leather journal, its cover worn smooth by handling. Ellie's fingers hovered over the journal before selecting the dog tags instead. The name was still legible, Blackwood Michael J. She closed her eyes and suddenly she was back there in the chaos of a battlefield hospital during the final days of a failing war. The air vibrated with the constant drumbeat of helicopter rotors. Outside the medical tent, the sound of distant artillery punctuated the humid air. Ellie moved between cots with practiced efficiency, triaging the latest arrivals. Doc, a medic beckoned urgently from the entrance. Chopper's waiting, but we're overweight. Captain says 8 max. Ellie wiped sweat-soaked hair from her forehead, leaving a streak of someone else's blood. We have 9 critical. 8, the medic insisted. Captain's orders. She surveyed the wounded men boys, really most barely old enough to vote. All needed immediate evacuation to the field hospital. All would die without it. Where's Tom? She asked, looking for her husband among the pilots. He'd take them all. Shot down yesterday, the medic replied, avoiding her eyes. Your son took his place for today's run. The news hit her like physical blow, but there was no time to process it. 9 critical patients, 8 seats. Lieutenant Blackwood lay on the furthest cot, shrapnel embedded in his chest and abdomen. Internal bleeding tension, pneumothorax, a litany of critical injuries. Another hour and he'd be beyond saving. Doctor, his voice was barely audible. Save the others. They have people waiting. So do you, she replied, automatically continuing to work on him. No one that matters. His bloodied hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. Please, I've seen enough. Let me go. She looked into his eyes and saw not fear, but a terrible resignation, the empty gaze of a man who had already died inside. The same look she'd seen in too many soldiers who survived physically but returned home as mere shadows. I can save you, she insisted. Some things aren't worth saving, Doc. The medic was shouting now. The chopper couldn't wait, the enemy was advancing. Aid or none. Ellie made her choice. The kettle's whistle jolted her back to the present. Ellie returned the dog tags to the box but kept the journal out. She'd never read it, respecting the privacy of a dead man's thoughts. But now his son had appeared in her life, carrying misplaced vengeance and dangerous intentions. She opened the journal to its final entry, dated 3 days before Michael Blackwood's death. If this war has taught me anything, it's that hatred is heavier than any pack we carry. My son deserves better than the legacy of my bitterness. If you're reading this, son, don't live to avenge me. Live because I couldn't. Ellie closed the book, a decision crystallizing in her mind. Ryan deserved to know his father's true thoughts, to understand the man behind the mythology he'd constructed, but approaching him directly would only inflame his hatred. She needed help. Her phone felt unusually heavy as she scrolled to a number she hadn't called in years. The line rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Sullivan. James. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears. The light we kept, it's time to shine again. A long silence followed. Then, Harbor View. Yes. How many? 5, maybe more. Another pause. What aren't you telling me, Ellie? She stared out her window at the light sweeping methodically across the dark water. It's Michael Blackwood's son, James. He's here, and he knows who I am. The sharp intake of breath told her James understood immediately. We'll be there tomorrow. Lock your doors tonight, Ellie. I always do. After ending the call, Ellie remained at her kitchen table, the journal open before her. Outside fog wrapped around her lighthouse like a shroud, muffling the distant sound of waves against the rocky shore. In the morning, everything would change. Help would arrive. Confrontation would become inevitable. But tonight there was only the light, the darkness, and the echoes of choices made decades ago, in a war nobody wanted to remember. Sleep eluded her. Ellie moved to her small study where a bookshelf held dozens of identical, leather-bound notebooks. Each contained the written trauma of soldiers she'd counseled over the years. The names had been removed, but she remembered every story, every confession, every moment of breakthrough. The community clinic where she volunteered had initially been skeptical of her battlefield journaling therapy. Traditional psychologists dismissed it as amateur intervention, but the results spoke for themselves. Veterans who couldn't speak of their experiences found healing in writing them down and sharing the burden of memory with someone who understood without judgment. Ellie selected one journal at random, opening to a passage she'd read countless times. The hardest part isn't what we did in war, it's living with who we became because of it. Every day I wake up and put on the mask of normalcy, but underneath I'm still crouching in that trench waiting for the next explosion. She closed the book. Ryan Blackwood wasn't so different from these men carrying the weight of a war he never fought, shaped by absence and abandonment. But unlike her patients who sought healing, Ryan had embraced his wounds, turning pain into a weapon. Morning arrived with the distant wail of sirens, an unusual sound in sleepy Harbor View. Ellie dressed quickly, her instincts from decades as a combat nurse surfacing automatically. Something was wrong. She drove toward town, passing the elementary school, where emergency vehicles clustered in the parking lot. Smoke rose from behind the building. As she slowed, Sheriff Dawson stepped into the road, waving her down. Dr. Matthews, he said, approaching her window. The young officer looked harried, his uniform rumpled. You might want to turn around. We've had an incident. What kind of incident? Dawson hesitated. Someone broke into the school overnight. Vandalism mostly, but they started a small fire in the gymnasium. We've got it contained. Anyone hurt? No, thank God. School's closed for the summer. His radio crackled and he stepped away to respond. When he returned, his expression had hardened. Dr. Matthews, were you at Frank's store last night? Yes, why? Did you have an altercation with Ryan Blackwood? A chill settled in her stomach. We exchanged words, nothing physical. Dawson nodded, making a note in his pad. We found something spray-painted on the gym wall. Specifically mentioned you and the lighthouse. The old light won't save you. Ring any bells? It's just vandalism, she replied, avoiding a direct answer. Probably kids. Kids don't usually quote Vietnam-era military code. Dawson studied her face. What's going on, Doctor? First, the protection racket at the marina, then Frank's store, now this. Suddenly, our quiet town has a gang problem, and somehow you're connected. I'm an old woman who keeps to herself, Sheriff. Hardly gang material. Maybe. His skepticism was evident. But when I ran Ryan Blackwood's name, I found something interesting. His father served in Vietnam, same time and place you were there as a nurse. Coincidence. There were thousands of us in Vietnam, Sheriff. Ellie kept her voice neutral. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments at the clinic. As she drove away, Ellie glanced in her rearview mirror. Dawson was still watching her phone pressed to his ear. The young sheriff wasn't as ineffectual as Frank had suggested. That could complicate matters. The community clinic occupied what had once been a family doctor's office, a converted Victorian at the edge of town. Dr. Patel, the director, intercepted Ellie in the parking lot. I was about to call you. The younger woman said, her British accent more pronounced when stressed. 2 of your veterans canceled their appointments after receiving threatening phone calls. What kind of threats? The callers said anyone participating in traitor therapy would face consequences. Dr. Patel's dark eyes flashed with anger. They specifically mentioned your battlefield journaling program. I've reported it to the police. More paperwork for Sheriff Dawson, Ellie murmured. This isn't a joke, Eleanor. These men need their therapy. Many were finally making progress. She folded her arms. Perhaps we should suspend the program temporarily. That's exactly what they want. Ellie shook her head firmly. I won't abandon my patients. It's not abandonment, it's prudence. We don't know who's making these threats or how serious they are. I know exactly who's making them. Ellie started toward the clinic entrance. And help is already on the way. Dr. Patel followed, confusion evident. What does that mean? What help? Before Ellie could respond, the rumble of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A convoy of 3 weathered RVs and several pickup trucks turned into the clinic parking lot. The lead vehicle, a massive Gulf War-era Humvee, parked directly in front of them. The driver's door opened and a tall man in his 70s stepped out. Despite his age, James Iron Sullivan moved with the fluid grace of someone 20 years younger. His silver hair was cropped in a military fade, his posture ramrod straight. Ellie, he said, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. Still causing trouble, I see. James, she stepped forward, clasping his outstretched hand. Thank you for coming. The Veterans Alliance responds when called. His gaze shifted to Dr. Patel. Ma'am, James Sullivan, these men and women, he gestured to the people emerging from the other vehicles, are here to assist with a community issue. Dr. Patel looked bewildered. What community issue requires a private army? Not an army, James corrected. Just old soldiers who still remember their oath to protect. Ellie turned to Dr. Patel. Mira, I need to speak with James privately. Can you reschedule my morning appointments? The doctor hesitated, clearly torn between professional concern and respect for Ellie's judgment. This isn't helping my blood pressure, Eleanor, but yes, I'll reschedule. She glanced at Sullivan and his companions. Just promise me no one will get hurt. That, said James quietly, depends entirely on others' choices. As Dr. Patel retreated inside, Ellie led James to a bench beneath an old maple tree. Around them, the Veterans Alliance members efficiently established a perimeter, setting up what appeared to be a mobile command center in the largest RV. You brought the whole team, Ellie observed. When you mentioned Michael Blackwood's son, I knew this wasn't a simple situation. James studied her face. You look tired, Ellie. I haven't slept well in 40 years. Why start now? The attempt at humor fell flat. How much do you know about Ryan Blackwood? James produced a tablet, swiping through several screens. Enough to be concerned. Dishonorable discharge from the Army after 18 months. Multiple arrests for assault weapons charges that mysteriously disappeared. Founded the Midnight Wolves 6 years ago, started as a typical motorcycle club before transitioning into organized criminal activities. And recently arrived in my quiet town. Not coincidentally. James showed her a document, military records detailing Michael Blackwood's service. Ryan's been tracing his father's history, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Every surviving member of Lieutenant Blackwood's unit has received a visit from the Wolves in the past 3 years. Ellie's stomach tightened. What happened to them? James's silence was answer enough. "He's here for revenge," she whispered, "for a death that happened before he could even remember his father." "Grief without guidance becomes rage," James replied, "and rage is easily manipulated by those with agendas." He swiped to another screen's surveillance photos, showing Ryan meeting with men in expensive suits exchanging packages. The wolves aren't just thugs anymore. They're connected. Arms dealing money, laundering domestic terrorism. You think that's why they're in Harborview? This sleepy town hardly seems strategic. It's not about strategy, it's about symbolism. James pointed toward the distant lighthouse. That beacon guided the last evacuation ships during the fall of Saigon. Ryan knows that. He knows you maintain it as a memorial to those you couldn't save. The revelation stunned her. How could Ryan possibly know that private truth? "I've kept that light burning for 40 years, she said softly. "Not for navigation, for remembrance. Some memories are weapons in the wrong hands, Ellie." James closed the tablet. Ryan isn't just here to intimidate an old woman. He's planning something bigger, something that will destroy not just you, but everything you've built since the war. What can we do? First, we secure your safety and establish our presence. Then we gather intelligence on their operations here. James's expression softened slightly. And you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that confrontation is inevitable. "I'm not afraid of confrontation, James." "No, you never were." His weathered hand covered hers briefly. "But this isn't a battlefield triage situation. You can't solve this by sacrificing yourself." "Maybe that's exactly how it needs to end," she replied, her voice barely audible. Before James could respond, a black SUV pulled into the clinic parking lot. A young woman emerged, tall with Ellie's same determined chin, but darker hair pulled into a practical ponytail. Sarah Matthews carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to crisis situations. "I came as soon as I got your message," she said, embracing her grandmother. "What's happening? And why is there a small army setting up camp in the clinic parking lot?" Ellie smiled despite the circumstances. "Sarah, this is James Sullivan. James, my granddaughter Sarah." Recognition flashed across Sarah's face. "Captain Sullivan, from Grandma's Stories." She extended her hand. "It's an honor, sir." "The honor is mine." James shook her hand. "Your grandmother saved my life more than once. And now you're here to return the favor." Sarah looked between them. "Someone tell me what's going on. Is this about those bikers who've been harassing the town?" "It's complicated," Ellie began. "It's about Vietnam," James said bluntly. "About choices made during war that have followed us home." Sarah's expression hardened. "My father and grandfather died there. What does that have to do with bikers extorting local businesses?" Ellie took her granddaughter's hand. "Come inside. There's a story I need to tell you, one I should have shared long ago." As they walked toward the clinic, the distant lighthouse beam swept across the morning sky, invisible in daylight, but persistent nonetheless. Like memory, like guilt, like the echoes of war that never truly faded, no matter how many decades of peace intervened. Behind them, the Veterans Alliance continued their quiet preparations. No weapons were visible, but their methodical efficiency spoke volumes. These weren't just elderly veterans reminiscing about past glories. They were experienced operators who understood the true nature of conflict and the terrible cost of victory. The storm that had been building for 40 years was about to break over Harborview, and when it did, no one would emerge unchanged. 3 days after the Veterans Alliance arrived in Harborview, the town began to change. Not in ways immediately visible to casual observers. The lobster boats still went out at dawn. Tourists still photographed the lighthouse children, still played on the rocky beach during low tide. But beneath this placid surface, invisible currents shifted. The RVs had positioned themselves strategically throughout town, one near the marina, another at the community center parking lot, the third at the edge of the public park. To outsiders, they appeared to be nothing more than retirement-age travelers enjoying coastal Maine. The Veterans Alliance members emerged each morning in civilian clothes, performing community services with remarkable efficiency. They repaired the school gymnasium's fire damage in a single day. They established a free automotive clinic for local teenagers, teaching them to maintain engines and replace brake pads. They organized a farmers market in the park, bringing produce from inland farms at prices that undercut the overpriced grocery chain that had monopolized the town. Ellie watched from her clinic window as James Sullivan directed these operations with the precision of a battlefield commander. No weapons were visible, no threats were issued, yet the message was unmistakable. Harbor View was under protection. "It's working," Sarah observed, joining her grandmother at the window. "The wolves haven't been seen since Tuesday." "They're watching," Ellie replied, "assessing." "Good. Let them see that this town isn't defenseless anymore." Ellie studied her granddaughter's profile, the determined set of her jaw, the analytical gaze that missed nothing. Sarah had inherited more than just physical traits from her lineage of military service. Though she'd chosen a different path, emergency management and crisis response, she carried the same unflinching courage. "You still haven't told me everything," Sarah said, turning to face her grandmother. "About Ryan Blackwood? About what really happened in Vietnam?" "Some stories aren't mine alone to tell." Ellie moved away from the window, gathering patient files from her desk. "I made choices during the war. People lived because of those choices. People died too, including Grandpa and Dad." The statement hung between them, not an accusation, but a simple acknowledgement of the truth that had shaped both their lives. "Yes," Ellie said quietly, "including them. And Lieutenant Blackwood." Ellie's hand stilled on the files. "James told you." "Some, not all." Sarah leaned against the desk. "I deserve to know why I'm suddenly living in what feels like an occupation zone. Why armed bikers might target my grandmother. Why retired veterans are setting up a shadow government in our town. Not a government, a shield. A shield against what exactly?" Ellie met her granddaughter's gaze. "Against a man who's made revenge his life's purpose. Ryan believes I chose to let his father die, that I prioritized other patients over Michael Blackwood because of some political calculation. Did you? I chose to save 8 men instead of 1. The words emerged with difficulty, each syllable carrying the weight of decades of self-recrimination. "Michael was the one I couldn't fit on the helicopter, the one I left behind." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing this. "You were a combat nurse, not God. You couldn't save everyone. Try telling that to a 5-year-old boy who grew up without a father. He's not 5 anymore. He's a grown man making his own choices, hurting innocent people." Sarah's voice hardened. "His pain doesn't justify what he's doing." "No, but it explains it." Ellie gathered her coat. "I have rounds at the senior center. Walk with me." Outside the main, summer hung, suspended between seasons. Warm sunshine cut with the first hints of autumn's approach. As they walked the 3 blocks to the senior center, Ellie noticed the subtle signs of the Alliance's presence. A veteran stood casually at each intersection, appearing to enjoy the weather while maintaining clear sightlines in all directions. Residents nodded to them with growing familiarity, already accepting their presence as normal. "Smart deployment," Sarah murmured. "Visible enough to reassure, discreet enough not to escalate." "James wrote the book on low-intensity conflict," Ellie replied. "Literally, it's required reading at West Point now." "Ixam, so what's the strategy here? Wait until Ryan gets bored and leaves town?" "Ryan won't leave." Ellie's certainty was absolute. "Not until he accomplishes whatever he came here to do, which is what? Kill you, destroy the town." "I don't know yet, but James is working on finding out." The senior center occupied a converted church hall, its stained glass windows casting colored light across worn hardwood floors. Inside, Ellie found a scene she hadn't expected. James Sullivan sat at a table with 4 elderly residents playing cards and laughing as if they'd known each other for years. "Ellie," James called, waving her over. "Meet my new poker rivals. They're cleaning me out." Martha Dunwood, 83 and sharp as a tack, grinned wickedly. "Your Captain Sullivan has deep pockets, but a terrible poker face." Ellie smiled, recognizing the deliberate community-building effort for what it was. The Alliance wasn't just establishing a security presence, they were integrating themselves into the town's fabric. "Don't let him fool you, Martha. James has been playing the same game with military intelligence officers for decades." "Well, he's met his match in retired librarians," Martha declared, laying down a royal flush to groans from the other players. James excused himself from the game, joining Ellie and Sarah in the hallway. His casual demeanor fell away like a discarded mask, replaced by the focused intensity that had earned him his nickname. "We've identified their base of operations," he said without preamble. Old fishing warehouse at the north end of the harbor. Minimal activity during daylight, but significant movement after midnight. What kind of movement? Sarah asked. Supply trucks, unmarked vans, military-grade communication equipment being installed. His expression was grave. This isn't a temporary operation, Ellie. They're establishing infrastructure. For what purpose? That's what we need to find out. James handed her a small portfolio. Your patient at 2 o'clock, Derek Foster, 28 local boy, served in Afghanistan. Calls himself Scout now. Ellie's eyes widened. Ryan's second in command. He's requested battlefield journaling therapy. Claims he's having nightmares, wants help processing his service experience. It's a trap, Sarah interjected. They're trying to get Grandma alone. Possibly, James conceded. Or he's legitimately struggling and seeking help from the one person in town known for treating combat trauma. He turned to Ellie. Either way, it's an opportunity. Ellie understood immediately. You want me to gather intelligence from him. I want you to do exactly what you always do, help a veteran in pain, but keep your eyes and ears open. Absolutely not, Sarah protested. You can't seriously expect Grandma to spy on a dangerous criminal organization. It's not spying, Ellie said quietly. It's listening. There's a difference. I don't care what you call it, it's too dangerous. James's expression softened with unexpected compassion. Ms. Matthews, your grandmother survived 3 tours in Vietnam, including the fall of Saigon. She extracted wounded men from active combat zones and performed surgery under artillery fire. She's not as fragile as you imagine. I know she's tough, Sarah replied, her voice tight with emotion. But she's also the only family I have left. Ellie touched her granddaughter's arm. Sarah, this is my choice, my responsibility. At least let me stay in the clinic during his appointment. That would violate patient confidentiality, Ellie countered. But James will have someone nearby. Won't you, Captain? 3 someones, he confirmed, all with direct communication lines and response times under 20 seconds. Sarah looked between them, recognizing the familiar military shorthand of people who'd faced danger together. You've already decided. Yes, Ellie admitted, but your concern means more than you know. The rest of the morning passed in ordinary routine blood pressure checks, medication reviews, the small comforts Ellie could offer to Harborview's aging population. But beneath this calm exterior, her mind was preparing for the afternoon's confrontation. Derek Foster arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Ellie observed him through her office window as he parked his motorcycle sleek and black, like the others but with fewer customizations. He removed his helmet, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, handsome in a weathered way, with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. He entered the clinic alone, his body language broadcasting discomfort in these surroundings. The waiting room fell silent as he approached the reception desk, other patients drawing back instinctively from the leather-clad figure who represented the town's newest threat. I have an appointment with Dr. Matthews. He said, his voice surprisingly soft. The receptionist, one of James's people, Ellie noted, nodded professionally. She's ready for you. Last door on the right. Derek moved down the hallway with the cautious awareness of a combat veteran, back to the walleyes, mapping exit routes, weight balanced for rapid response. Ellie recognized these unconscious habits. She'd seen them in hundreds of soldiers struggling to readjust to civilian spaces. He knocked once before entering her office, closing the door behind him. Dr. Matthews. His greeting carried respect but wariness. Thank you for seeing me. Please sit. She gestured to the comfortable chair across from her desk, noting how he chose to stand instead. I'm not sure why I'm here, he admitted, scanning the room in a practice sweep. According to your intake form, you're experiencing combat-related nightmares and anxiety. Is that accurate? Yes. The simple admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. But that's not unusual for veterans. No, it isn't. But suffering in silence is a choice, not a requirement. Ellie kept her tone matter-of-fact, the way she'd spoken to wounded men who felt shame at their injuries. What branch did you serve in Washari? Yeah, Marines. Scout sniper? 2 tours in Afghanistan. Honorable discharge. A flicker of something, pride perhaps, or defiance crossed his face. Yes, unlike some of us. Ellie noted the distinction, his subtle separation from others in the Wolves. What brings you to Harborview, Derek? You know why I'm here. I'd prefer to hear it from you. Derek studied her face as if searching for traps in her neutral expression. Finally, he sank into the chair, physical exhaustion overriding caution. Ryan saved my life when I got back. I was lost, drinking, fighting, couldn't hold a job. His fingers traced the scar on his face unconsciously. The VA gave me pills. Ryan gave me purpose. And that purpose brought you here. Ryan has unfinished business in this town. Derek's eyes met hers directly. With you. I gathered that from our brief encounter at Frank's store. Ellie leaned forward slightly. Did he tell you who I am? What I supposedly did. You left his father to die during the evacuation of Saigon. Derek recited the accusation flatly, as if repeating a lesson. You chose other men over Lieutenant Blackwood because of political considerations. Is that what you believe happened? It's what Ryan believes. And you follow his beliefs unquestioningly. Derek's jaw tightened. I follow his lead because he's earned my loyalty. Just as you followed your commanding officers in Afghanistan. That was different. How Ellie kept her voice gentle, non-confrontational. We had a mission, a purpose. And what's your purpose here? Derek terrorizing shop owners, vandalizing schools. He flinched at the second accusation. I had nothing to do with the school. That was Decker and Rollins Ryan's newer recruits. They're extreme. You're not. I follow orders, he said stiffly. But I don't hurt civilians. Never have, never will. Ellie recognized the military code that still guided him, despite his current affiliations. She changed tactics, retrieving a leather journal from her desk drawer. This is what we use in battlefield journaling therapy, she explained, sliding it across the desk. The process is simple but effective. You write about your combat experiences not for anyone else to read, but to organize your own thoughts. And that helps with the nightmares. It can. When traumatic memories remain fragmented and chaotic, they surface unpredictably often during sleep. Writing creates narrative structure, which helps the brain process and file away the experiences properly. Derek touched the journal hesitantly. Ryan wouldn't approve of me talking to you. You don't have to talk, just write. Sorry. She produced a pen. Start with one memory, any memory from your service. Describe it in as much detail as you can. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then he took the pen and opened the journal. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, the disciplined script of someone educated in precision. Ellie watched silently as he filled one page, then another. His expression shifted subtly as he wrote brow, furrowing jaw, clenching eyes growing distant as he revisited whatever scene he was recording. After 20 minutes, he stopped flexing his cramped hand. What now? He asked. Now we talk about what you wrote. She pointed to the journal. Not the specific content that remains private, but how it felt to write it down. Derek considered this. Like disarming a bomb, carefully removing each component until it can't explode anymore. That's an apt description. Many veterans report similar feelings. My father killed himself. The statement emerged abruptly, seemingly unconnected to their conversation. When I was 14, he was Vietnam like Ryan's dad. Never talked about it. Just drank until he couldn't feel anything, then put his service pistol in his mouth when the numbness wasn't enough anymore. Ellie felt the familiar ache of recognition, another casualty of war who died years after leaving the battlefield. I'm sorry, Derek. Why am I telling you this? He seemed genuinely confused by his own disclosure. Because carrying battle wounds alone eventually becomes unbearable, she said gently, even when the battle was someone else's. Derek stared at the journal, then abruptly closed it. I should go. Keep the journal. Write in it tonight if you can. You don't understand. Ryan has plans for this town for you specifically. His voice dropped. I shouldn't be here at all. Yet you came anyway. Why? He stood moving toward the door. The nightmares were getting worse. Heard you helped guys like me. I do, and I can help you too if you'll let me. Derek paused, hand on the doorknob. Is it true what they say that you couldn't save everyone during the evacuation? No one could, Ellie replied softly. We tried. We failed. We live with those failures every day. Something in her words seemed to reach him. He nodded once, a barely perceptible acknowledgement of shared understanding. Be careful, Dr. Matthews. Ryan isn't rational about you. And the new guys he's brought in, they're not like us old school wolves. They don't have lines they won't cross. With that cryptic warning, he left the journal tucked inside his leather jacket. Sarah burst into the office minutes later, face tight with worry. Are you okay? What happened? A productive first session, Ellie replied calmly, organizing her notes. Did he threaten you? Quite the opposite. He warned me. James appeared in the doorway, his expression revealing nothing. What did you learn? There's a split forming in the Wolves, Ellie explained. The original members veterans like Derek versus newer recruits with more extreme tendencies. Typical radicalization pattern, James noted. The founder gradually surrounds himself with more extreme elements who push the group toward escalating violence. Derek mentioned specific plans for the town and for me, Ellie continued, but he's conflicted about his role in them. Sarah paced the small office. So we flipped one of Ryan's lieutenants, just like that. We haven't flipped anyone, Ellie corrected. Derek is a wounded veteran seeking help. The fact that he might also provide useful information is secondary. He always the healer first, Ellie. James said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Even in the middle of a war zone. This isn't a war zone, James. It's my home. Tell that to Ryan Blackwood. As dusk settled over Harborview, the quality of light changed golden rays, giving way to lengthening shadows that crawled across storefronts and harbor waters. The town transformed in these transitional hours, tourists retreating to their rentals and bed and breakfasts, while locals reclaimed their community spaces. Sarah stood at the lighthouse window, watching distant figures move along the harbor walkway. Two Veterans Alliance members conducted their evening patrol, nodding to fishermen securing their boats for the night. The normalcy of the scene belied the tension humming beneath the town's surface. You should be on your way back to Portland, Ellie said, joining her granddaughter at the window. Your emergency management team will be wondering where you disappeared to. I called in personal leave. They understand. Sarah continued her surveillance of the harbor. Besides, I'm exactly where I need to be managing an emergency. Ellie smiled despite her concern. You're stubborn. Wonder where I got that from. They stood in comfortable silence, the lighthouse beam sweeping overhead in its eternal rhythm. 3 generations of Matthews women had maintained this light, Ellie's mother during World War II, Ellie herself after Vietnam, and now in some small way Sarah was joining that legacy. Tell me about him, Sarah said suddenly. About Grandpa Tom. The request caught Ellie off guard. They rarely spoke of Tom Matthews, the absence too painful, the memories too precious to risk diluting them with words. He was a pilot. Ellie began the familiar ache spreading beneath her breastbone. Not just any pilot, the best. When other helicopter crews refused missions as too dangerous, Tom would go. He said if our boys were brave enough to fight on the ground, he'd be damned if they died there for lack of a ride home. Who and my father, what was he like? Just like Tom, stubborn, brilliant, fearless. Ellie's voice softened with memory. He was supposed to be in medical school, but when the war stretched on, he deferred his acceptance and enlisted as a medic. Said he couldn't study medicine in a classroom while his father was flying into hot zones. They died the day before you had to make the choice about Lieutenant Blackwood. It wasn't a question, but Ellie answered anyway. Yes, their helicopter was shot down during an extraction mission. No survivors. The words emerged mechanically rehearsed through decades of repetition. I was informed 10 minutes before the final evacuation flights began. Sarah turned from the window, studying her grandmother's face. You never told me that part before. You had just lost your husband and son, and then had to choose who lived and who died. Everyone was losing people, Ellie said simply. My grief wasn't special, but it shaped everything that came after. This lighthouse, your work with veterans, even how you raised Mom. Perhaps, not perhaps, definitely. Sarah took her grandmother's hand. Ryan Blackwood isn't the only one haunted by Vietnam, is he? Before Ellie could respond, the whine of motorcycles shattered the evening stillness. Not 1 or 2, a dozen at least, their engines synchronized in an intimidating growl that echoed across the harbor. Sarah moved to the eastern window. They're coming up Harbor Road, a lot of them. Get away from the windows, Ellie instructed, reaching for her phone. She pressed a single button the emergency contact James had programmed. "We see them," James answered immediately. 14 riders, all armed. "What's the plan?" "Stay inside, lock the doors, we're mobilizing now." The motorcycles stopped at the base of the lighthouse path. In the gathering darkness, headlights illuminated the narrow trail leading to Ellie's cottage. A single rider advanced up the path while the others remained in formation on the road. "It's Ryan," Sarah reported, peering cautiously from behind the curtain. "He's alone." "Tell James not to engage," Ellie said, moving toward the door. "I'll speak with him." "Grandma, no." But Ellie was already on the porch, illuminated by the motion sensor light that cast harsh shadows across the weathered boards. Ryan stopped his motorcycle 30 feet from the house, killing the engine. The sudden silence felt more threatening than the noise. "Dr. Matthews," he called, remaining seated on his bike. "Beautiful evening for a chat. Mr. Blackwood." Ellie's voice betrayed none of the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I don't recall inviting you to my home. I don't recall asking permission." His smile was all teeth, no humor. "But then you didn't ask my father's permission before leaving him to die, did you? Is that why you're here to rehash 40-year-old battlefield decisions?" Ryan dismounted, moving with deliberate slowness. "I'm here because you called in reinforcements, escalated a simple business arrangement into something unnecessarily complicated. Extortion isn't business. Semantics." He advanced another few steps. "I came to deliver a message, Doctor. Your geriatric army doesn't scare me. This is my town now. Harborview belongs to its people. Not to you, not to me, not to anyone." "Noble sentiment," Ryan's voice hardened. "But sentiment doesn't stop bullets, doesn't prevent fires, doesn't protect the people you care about." The threat hung in the damp evening air between them. "If you're threatening me," Ellie began. "Not just you," Ryan cut her off. "Your granddaughter, the old one-armed man at the store, the veterans you counsel, every person in this town who matters to you." Fury rose in Ellie's chest, not the hot, reactive anger of youth, but the cold, focused rage of someone who had witnessed humanity's worst and survived to rebuild. 40 years ago, I made an impossible choice," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. "One life against 8. I've lived with the consequences every day since. But you, Ryan Blackwood, are making a very different kind of choice." "And what's that, Doctor?" "You're choosing hatred over healing, vengeance over peace, the path that destroys you along with your targets." She stepped forward, ignoring Sarah's whispered warning from inside. "Your father understood that kind of choice. He saw what hatred did to men in war. It hollowed them out until nothing remained but the shell of who they once were." Something flickered in Ryan's expression, doubt perhaps, or unwelcome recognition. Then his face hardened again. "You don't get to speak about my father. You don't have the right." "I was with him when he died," Ellie said quietly. "I heard his last words." "Liar!" The word exploded from Ryan. "He died alone, abandoned by the people who swore to save lives, regardless of politics. He died thinking of you." Ellie took another step forward. His final thoughts weren't of hatred or revenge. They were of hope that his son would find a better path. Ryan's hand moved toward his jacket where the outline of a weapon was visible. "Stop talking." "I can prove it," Ellie continued steadily. "I have his journal. His last entry was meant for you." The revelation visibly shook him. His hand froze halfway to his weapon. "You're lying," he repeated, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it to his family." Ellie held his gaze. "Come inside. Read it yourself." For a moment, the air between them vibrated with possibility, a fragile opening where reconciliation might replace retribution. Then a second motorcycle roared up the path, shattering the tenuous connection. "Ryan." The new arrival, a heavily tattooed man with cold, assessing eyes, pulled alongside. Police scanners lit up. "Someone called in our presence. We need to move." Ryan hesitated, gaze still locked with Ellie's. "Now, boss," the man insisted. The moment passed. Ryan's expression shuddered vulnerability, replaced by practiced menace. "Our business isn't finished, Dr. Matthews," he called as he remounted his motorcycle. "Not even close." He turned to his companion. "Tell Decker to proceed with tonight's plan. All elements." What about the old lady? Ryan's gaze returned to Ellie, calculating. She'll keep. We have other priorities tonight. The motorcycle's roar echoed across the water as they retreated down the path, rejoining their companions on the main road. Within moments, the entire group had disappeared around the harbor curve. Ellie remained on the porch, sensing the fundamental shift that had just occurred. Whatever plans Ryan had for Harborview, they were accelerating now. The quiet phase of this conflict was ending. Sarah emerged from the house, wrapping an arm around her grandmother's shoulders. What did he mean by tonight's plan? Before Ellie could respond, a distant explosion shattered the night, a concussive boom that rattled windows and set car alarms wailing throughout town. An orange glow rose from the direction of the marina. Ellie's phone rang, James's voice urgent through the speaker. They've cut power to the entire east side of town, he reported, and the boathouse is on fire. Casualties? Ellie asked immediately. Unknown. We're responding now. Sarah was already moving toward her car. I'll head to the town emergency operations center. We need to coordinate fire response. Be careful, Ellie called after her. This isn't just vandalism anymore. I know. Sarah paused at her car door. It's war. As her granddaughter drove away, Ellie turned back toward the lighthouse. Its beam continued its steady rotation, unaffected by the town's power outage, operating on its independent generator, as it had for decades. Light cutting through darkness. Constancy amid chaos. A beacon guiding the way forward when all other systems failed. Ellie climbed the lighthouse stairs with renewed purpose. From this height, she could see the spreading fire, the flashing emergency lights, the figures rushing toward the crisis. She could also see the boats slipping quietly into the harbor from the North Veterans Alliance members, mobilizing their response. The first real battle for Harborview had begun. And like every battle Ellie had survived, this one would be fought not just with weapons and tactics, but with courage, conviction, and the willingness to face impossible choices. She reached for her phone again, dialing a number she rarely used. Frank, she said when he answered, it's time for Plan B. Fire painted Harborview in shades of amber and crimson. The Marina Boathouse, a historic structure that had weathered a century of nor'easters, collapsed in a shower of sparks that drifted across the harbor like malevolent fireflies. Emergency sirens wailed through streets, suddenly unfamiliar in darkness. The power outage had transformed the quiet town into a maze of shadows, disorienting residents who had navigated these roads for decades. Only the lighthouse beam provided consistent orientation, sweeping steadily across the chaos with mechanical precision. Sarah Matthews stood in the town's emergency operations center, a reinforced room in the municipal building's basement, illuminated by generator-powered fluorescents that buzz like angry wasps. Around her, Harborview's limited emergency personnel attempted to coordinate their response. The fire department is stretched thin. Police Chief Dawson reported, his young face etched with strain. We've got 3 separate blazes now: Marina East Side Transformer Station and a vehicle fire blocking Harbor Road. They're strategic targets, Sarah observed, marking each location on the wall map. Transportation power infrastructure, emergency access routes. This isn't random vandalism. It's a military-style coordinated attack, agreed a new voice. James Sullivan entered the operations center, accompanied by 3 Veterans Alliance members, a woman in her 60s with the bearing of a career officer, and 2 men who moved with the quiet efficiency of special operations veterans. Captain Sullivan, Sarah acknowledged. What's your assessment? The fires are diversionary, he replied, studying the map. Create chaos, stretch emergency resources thin, then strike the actual target while response capability is compromised. What target? Chief Dawson demanded. What do these people want? That's what we need to determine. James turned to Sarah. Where's your grandmother? At the lighthouse. I tried calling, but cell service is down. Landlines too, added the police dispatcher. Someone cut the main fiber optic trunk. We're operating on emergency radio only. James's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The lighthouse has independent communications, old naval equipment, Ellie maintained. Colonel Wilson, he nodded to the woman beside him, will establish a command post there. Chief Dawson, I suggest you send an officer to coordinate. Dawson bristled at the implied assumption of authority. This is a civilian emergency captain, not a military operation. With respect, Chief, the people attacking your town are using military tactics. You need a military response. James's tone left no room for argument. My people are already moving to secure critical infrastructure and establish observation posts. You can't just—" "He's right," Sarah interrupted. "We're outmatched here. Captain Sullivan's team has the experience we need." She met Dawson's gaze directly. "I've managed disaster responses across 3 states. Trust me on this, accept the help." After a moment's hesitation, Dawson nodded grudgingly. "Fine, but my officers remain in charge of civilian safety and law enforcement." "Agreed." James turned to his team. "Colonel, head to the lighthouse. Lieutenant Reed, coordinate with Fire Command. Major Winters, I want eyes on the Wolves warehouse within 20 minutes." As the Veterans Alliance members departed with practiced efficiency, Sarah approached James privately. "You think the lighthouse is the real target," she said. It wasn't a question. "Ryan's vendetta is personal. The attacks on infrastructure are just clearing the path." He checked his watch. "How fast can you get back to your grandmother?" 10 minutes on back roads, assuming they're not blocked." "Take Lieutenant Hayes with you." James gestured to a wiry man by the door. "He's our best driver." Sarah gathered her emergency kit, flashlight, radio, first aid supplies. "What about you?" "I'm going to have a conversation with Derek Foster." James's expression was unreadable. "Your grandmother made a connection with him. Let's see if it was strong enough." "You think he'll betray Ryan?" "I think he's a soldier caught between loyalty and conscience." James handed her a satellite phone, military grade, heavily encrypted. "If you can't reach the lighthouse, fall back to Extraction Point Bravo. Hayes knows the location." The calm, precise deployment of assets and contingency planning steadied Sarah's nerves. This wasn't her first crisis, but it was the first that threatened her own family directly. "Captain Sullivan," she said as they prepared to depart, "my grandmother believes there's still hope for Ryan, that he can be reached somehow through his father's memory." "Ellie always sees the potential for redemption," James replied, his voice softening slightly. "Sometimes she's right. And if she's wrong this time—" His eyes met hers, the compassion receding behind combat readiness. "Then I'll do what I've always done, protect her, even from her own mercy." The power station hummed with returning electricity as Ellie connected the final bypass circuit. Frank handed her tools with his single hand, their decades of friendship enabling wordless cooperation. Around them, the substation's concrete walls muffled the distant chaos of emergency vehicles and evacuation orders. "You haven't lost your touch," Frank observed as lights flickered on throughout the facility. "Some skills you never forget." Ellie closed the access panel and wiped grease from her hands. "This will restore power to the hospital and emergency services. The rest of the grid needs professional repair." "You were a nurse, not an electrician." "Military necessity teaches versatility." She smiled faintly. "When your field hospital loses power during surgery, you learn to improvise." Frank checked his watch, an ancient military chronometer that had survived combat and decades of civilian life. "Sarah should have reached the lighthouse by now. James will secure the harbor perimeter within the hour. And Ryan, still unlocated, his men are scattered throughout town coordinating the sabotage, but he's not with any of them." Ellie nodded, having expected this answer. "He's preparing for the endgame." "Which is what exactly?" "I'm not certain, but I believe it involves Michael's journal." They exited the substation through a maintenance tunnel emerging behind the municipal building. Emergency personnel rushed past without noticing the elderly pair who had just restored critical infrastructure. "The journal is that important?" Frank asked as they made their way toward his waiting truck. "Not the journal itself, but what it represents." Ellie winced as pain shot through her arthritic hip. "Ryan has built his entire identity around avenging his father's death. If he learns the truth that Michael didn't want vengeance, that his final thoughts were of peace, it destroys the foundation of who Ryan believes himself to be. Some men don't want truth. They prefer the comfort of their hatred." "Perhaps." Ellie paused, studying her oldest friend's weathered face. "You never told me, Frank. All these years about the boy." Frank looked away, his jaw tightening. "Wasn't my place. You saved Ryan from the camps, brought him to America, watched over him from a distance." She touched his arm gently. "Why didn't you tell him who you were?" "What was I supposed to say? Hey, kid, I'm the guy who promised your dying father I'd get you out, then lost track of you for 20 years, while you bounced between foster homes." His voice grew hoarse with suppressed emotion. I failed Michael. Failed the boy too. You saved his life. Saving isn't enough. Never was. Frank started the truck's engine. That's what you never understood, Ellie. Sometimes people need more than just being saved. They need to be whole again. As they drove toward the lighthouse, Ellie considered Frank's words. Her entire career, both in combat medicine and later in veteran therapy, had focused on saving lives, mending bodies, healing minds. But perhaps Frank was right. Perhaps some wounds required more than clinical intervention. The darkened town passed by in surreal tableau, residents with flashlights checking on elderly neighbors, teenagers directing traffic at powerless intersections, Veterans Alliance members establishing security perimeters with quiet authority. A community adapting to crisis with unexpected resilience. You were right about James and his people, Frank admitted reluctantly. Town needed them. The town needs all of us, even Ryan. Frank shot her a skeptical glance. You still think he can be reached? I have to believe that. Otherwise, what have I been fighting for all these years? The road to the lighthouse curved sharply upward, offering a panoramic view of Harborview below. From this elevation, the town resembled a war zone. Pockets of darkness interspersed with the frantic movement of emergency lights, all contained within the steady pulse of the lighthouse beam overhead. Frank slowed the truck suddenly. Something's wrong. What is it? Sarah's car. It should be here. He pointed to the empty parking area beside Ellie's cottage. And there should be Alliance security visible. Dread settled in Ellie's stomach like a cold stone. Stop the truck. Ellie, stop here, Frank. If something's happened, we can't drive into it blindly. He complied, pulling to the side of the narrow road. They were still a quarter-mile from the lighthouse, protected from view by a dense stand of pines. I need to get up there, Ellie said, already opening her door. Not alone. Frank reached beneath his seat, extracting a compact pistol. I may be one-armed, but I can still shoot. No firearms, she said firmly. Not yet. We don't know what we're walking into. Exactly why we need protection. Frank, please. Her eyes met his. Violence is what brought us here. It won't be what saves us. After a moment's hesitation, Frank returned the weapon to its hiding place. Your call, Doc, but I'm coming with you. They approached on foot through the wooded hillside rather than following the road. Despite their age, both moved with the acquired stealth of people who had once navigated jungles under enemy observation. The forest floor, padded with decades of pine needles, muffled their footsteps. As they neared the clearing surrounding the lighthouse, voices became audible, tense, argumentative. You had no authorization for this. Sarah's voice tight with controlled fury. Don't lecture me about authorization. Ryan's reply carried clearly through the night air. Your people started this escalation. By stopping your extortion racket, that's hardly escalation. Enough. A third voice, deeper, unfamiliar. Bring the old woman's journal and let's finish this. We're exposed here. Ellie signaled Frank to remain still as she edged closer to the tree line. From this vantage point, she could see the tableau clearly. Sarah stood on the lighthouse steps, physically barring access. Ryan faced her, flanked by two men Ellie didn't recognize, both heavily armed with military-grade weapons that seemed incongruous against their leather biker vests. I don't have access to my grandmother's personal belongings, Sarah was saying, and even if I did, I wouldn't give them to you. Then I guess we wait for Dr. Matthews to return. Shall we? Ryan's posture was deceptively casual, but Ellie recognized the combat-ready stance. Your backup isn't coming, by the way. We intercepted them half a mile down the road. Sarah's expression revealed nothing, but Ellie could see her granddaughter's mind calculating options, buying time. What's so important about an old journal anyway? Ask your grandmother, Ryan replied. She's the one who's kept it hidden for 40 years. It belonged to your father. Sarah's statement caused visible surprise on Ryan's face. She's been saving it for you. The taller of Ryan's companions stepped forward impatiently. This family drama is touching, but we're on a schedule. The transfer is in 3 hours. Transfer of what? Sarah demanded. None of your concern. Ellie had heard enough. These men weren't just bikers with a grudge. They were engaged in something far more sinister, using Ryan's personal vendetta as cover for their actual operation. She stepped from the tree-line, hands visible at her sides. Hello, Ryan. All heads turned sharply. The armed men raised their weapons instinctively before Ryan gestured for them to stand down. Dr. Matthews, He acknowledged, unsurprised by her appearance. Right on schedule. Grandma don't, Sarah warned. They've got men all through the woods. I know. Ellie continued her steady approach. I counted 3 on our way up. Former military, but not experienced in forest concealment. She addressed Ryan directly. Your original wolves are veterans. These new recruits lack their training. A flicker of appreciation crossed Ryan's face. You've got a good eye for someone your age. Combat assessment becomes instinct after a while. She stopped 15 feet from the group. Where is Lieutenant Hayes? Alive, for now. Ryan nodded toward the lighthouse. Inside with the rest of your security detail. They'll remain unharmed if we conclude our business efficiently. And what business is that exactly? You know what I want. Your father's journal, Ellie nodded. But that's not all, is it, these men? She gestured to his companions. They're not here about a 40-year-old diary. The taller man stepped forward menacingly. Enough talking. Get the journal and the access codes, or we start shooting fingers off your granddaughter. Back off, Decker. Ryan ordered, his tone carrying unexpected authority. This is still my operation. Your operation is a cover for our operation, Decker responded coldly. And our timetable doesn't allow for family therapy sessions. Understanding dawned on Ellie with sudden clarity. The lighthouse. You need access to the lighthouse. Ryan's expression confirmed her suspicion. Why, she pressed. It's decommissioned except for local tradition. The location, Sarah realized, her emergency management training connecting the pieces. It's the highest point in the county with clear sight lines in all directions. And it has independent power. Smart girl, Decker smiled without warmth. Now get your grandmother to unlock the naval communication equipment she's been maintaining up there. Ellie felt the pieces click into place. You're not just arms dealers. You're coordinating something bigger. Shatun, the last stage, requires line-of-sight communication across specific transmission channels. Decker confirmed, apparently beyond caring about operational security. Channels that old naval equipment can access without leaving digital fingerprints. For what purpose? National renewal. The second armed man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the fervent quality of a true believer. Wiping the slate clean so America can be reborn. Domestic terrorism. The Veterans Alliance had suspected weapons trafficking, but this was far worse, a coordinated attack using Ryan's personal vendetta as cover to access critical infrastructure. Ellie turned to Ryan. Is this what your father died for? Is this how you honor his memory? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. My father died because his country abandoned him, because people like you made choices about whose lives mattered. Yes, Ellie agreed simply. I made an impossible choice, and I've lived with it every day since. She took a step closer. But your father made choices too, Ryan. In his final hours, he chose forgiveness over hatred, hope over despair. You're lying, Ryan said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. The journal is in my cottage. Let Sarah go release your hostages, and I'll give it to you. No deal, Decker interjected. We need the old naval equipment too. Complete the transfer, then worry about your family drama. Ryan stood suspended between loyalties, the mission he'd committed to, versus the truth about his father that had driven him for decades. Ryan, Ellie said gently, your father's last words weren't of hatred or revenge. They were of you, of his hope that you would live freely unburdened by his death. Enough, Decker raised his weapon. Get the journal and the access codes now, or I start shooting people. The moment ballooned with tension. Then a new voice cut through the night calm, authoritative, and coming from directly behind Decker. I wouldn't recommend that course of action. James Sullivan emerged from the shadows of the lighthouse itself, his service pistol pressed against Decker's skull. Behind him, Veterans Alliance members seemed to materialize from various hiding places, weapons trained on Ryan's men with unwavering precision. Drop your weapons, James ordered. Slowly? Decker laughed harshly. You're outnumbered, old man. I have 3 teams in these woods. Head, James corrected. They've been neutralized by my people. We've also secured your warehouse operation at the harbor. The FBI tactical team is 20 minutes out. The second armed man swung his weapon towards Sarah. I'll kill her before you can... The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the clearing. The man crumpled, clutching his shoulder in shock rather than mortal injury. Frank lowered his hunting rifle from his position at the tree line, already acquiring his next target with practiced efficiency. "One-armed, but I can still shoot," he called to Ellie. The sudden reversal left Ryan momentarily frozen. Unlike his companions, he hadn't raised his weapon. His eyes remained fixed on Ellie, searching for truth or deception in her weathered face. "It doesn't have to end this way," she told him quietly. "There's been enough fighting." "It's too late," he replied, equally quiet. "Things are already in motion that can't be stopped." Decker took advantage of the momentary distraction to lunge away from James, raising his weapon in a desperate bid for control. Two shots rang out simultaneously, one from James's pistol, one from Frank's rifle. Decker collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. The remaining wolves, seeing their leader fall, broke cover from various positions around the lighthouse. For 30 chaotic seconds, the clearing erupted in gunfire, controlled bursts from the Veterans Alliance versus the panicked volleys of outmaneuvered men. When silence returned, 7 of Ryan's men lay wounded or surrendered. 3 Alliance members had sustained minor injuries. And Ryan himself stood unharmed, his unfired weapon at his feet, face slack with the shock of witnessing his operation disintegrate in moments. "Secure the perimeter," James ordered his team. "Medical attention for all wounded. Colonel Wilson, signal the FBI that we have the situation contained." While the Alliance members efficiently carried out these instructions, Ellie approached Ryan. He made no move to resist as she guided him away from the others toward the lighthouse entrance. "Come with me," she said gently. "It's time you read your father's words." Inside her cottage, while Sarah and James coordinated with arriving authorities, Ellie retrieved the small wooden box from its hiding place. Ryan sat at her kitchen table, his imposing physical presence somehow diminished in these surroundings, a warrior suddenly uncertain of his battle. She placed Michael Blackwood's journal before him. The last entry is dated 3 days before his death. Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he opened the weathered cover. His father's handwriting filled the page's neat, disciplined script that reflected the man's military bearing. He turned to the final entry with the careful movements of someone handling a live explosive. Ellie stepped back, giving him privacy for this moment of reckoning. The lighthouse beam swept overhead, its rhythmic pulse counting the seconds as Ryan confronted the truth he'd avoided for decades. When he looked up, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. "He knew he was dying," Ryan said, his voice raw. "Even before that final day, he was already making peace with it." "Many soldiers develop that sense," Ellie confirmed. "A premonition of their fate." Ryan's finger traced his father's final words. "If you're reading this, son, don't live to avenge me. Live because I couldn't." "All these years," he whispered, "I thought I was honoring him by hunting down those responsible for his death." "You were a child carrying an adult's burden," Ellie said. "We all were in different ways." "What happens now?" He gestured vaguely toward the activity outside. "Federal charges, prison." "Yes." She wouldn't offer false comfort. "But there's also testimony, cooperation, evidence against the real extremists who used your pain for their purposes. Redemption through betrayal doesn't seem much of a choice. It's not betrayal to choose a different path than hatred." Ellie sat across from him. "Your father understood that. So did Frank." Ryan's head jerked up. "Frank, what does he have to do with this?" The cottage door opened and Frank entered, his rifle now absent. He stood in the doorway, studying Ryan with an expression that mingled shame, relief, and decades of suppressed emotion. "Hello, Ryan," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Ryan stared in confusion. "What are you talking about? You've been in Harborview for years. Before that," Frank moved into the room slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Saigon, April 1975. I was your father's sergeant. I was with him when he died." The revelation hit Ryan visibly. "You all this time you were the one who got you out." Frank's voice roughened. "Your father made me promise to find you if anything happened to him, to make sure you grew up knowing who he really was." He looked down at his single arm. "But I came back broken. Couldn't even take care of myself, let alone a child. By the time I got my life together, you disappeared into the system." "So you just gave up?" Bitterness edged Ryan's question. "No. I tracked you, watched from a distance, tried to intervene when I could without revealing myself." Frank met Ryan's accusing gaze directly. "I failed your father." failed you too. Some debts can't be repaid no matter how long you try. The two men regarded each other across a gulf of misunderstanding and missed connections. Then Ryan looked down at his father's journal again, reading the final lines once more. He wouldn't want this, Ryan said finally. Any of it. The vengeance. The violence. He closed the journal carefully. I've been chasing ghosts instead of honoring his memory. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles announced the FBI's arrival. Ryan stood his decision visibly forming. I'll cooperate, he told Ellie. Tell them everything about Decker's network. The weapons, the domestic terror cells, everything. It won't erase what's happened, she cautioned. No, but maybe it stops what was coming next. He extended the journal toward her. Keep this safe. I'll need something to read in prison. As federal agents secured the scene processing the wounded and arrested wolves, Ryan provided a preliminary statement that sent teams rushing to 3 additional locations where weapons caches had been stored. The coordinated attack he'd helped facilitate had been neutralized before it began. James found Ellie on the lighthouse observation deck where she stood watching the emergency lights gradually diminishing as dawn approached. The harbor fires had been extinguished, power restored to critical infrastructure, wounded treated, and perpetrators detained. Just like old times, he said, joining her at the railing, except we're still standing at the end. We were lucky, Ellie replied. Luck had nothing to do with it. You saw the humanity in Ryan that everyone else missed. I saw his father in him, she corrected, the man who faced death with dignity and concern for others. They stood in comfortable silence watching the first hints of sunrise touch the eastern horizon. Below, Sarah coordinated with emergency management officials, her natural leadership evident even from this distance. Your granddaughter is remarkable, James observed. Like her grandmother. Better. She has all my stubbornness, but none of my ghosts. Everyone has ghosts, Ellie. Some are just better at living alongside them. The sun crested the horizon, painting the harbor waters with golden light. In this illumination, the damage from the night's chaos was clearly visible. Charred buildings, damaged infrastructure, the temporary command posts of emergency responders. But visible, too, were the signs of community resilience, neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers, distributing supplies, the ordinary heroism of people refusing to be defined by crisis. What will happen to Ryan? Ellie asked. Federal custody, extensive debriefing, then likely a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. James shrugged. The prosecutors will be more interested in the extremist network than in a man who lost his way. And Derek, already providing information. Your therapy session made more impact than you knew. Ellie smiled faintly. Healing works in unexpected ways. As the town below stirred to life in the new day, Ellie felt the weight of decades ease slightly from her shoulders. The choices made in war could never be unmade. The lives lost could never be restored. But perhaps in the echoes that followed such trauma, new possibilities could emerge. Redemption, reconciliation, the painful journey toward wholeness. The lighthouse beam, automated now that power had been restored, continued its rhythmic sweep. Despite the daylight, a tradition maintained, a promise kept. Ellie watched its path across the now calm harbor waters, remembering all those who had depended on its guidance through storm-tossed nights. Time to deactivate it, James asked, nodding toward the light. No, Ellie replied. Some beacons need to remain lit even when the darkness recedes. 3 months later, Harborview celebrated the formal reopening of its renovated lighthouse. The structure no longer just Ellie's private memorial, but now a recognized historic site, had been restored with federal grants and community fundraising. Within its circular walls, a new museum documented both its maritime history and its unexpected role in preventing a domestic terror attack. Sarah led the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her new position as Town Emergency Management Director formalized after her leadership during the crisis. Beside her stood Frank, recently revealed as the anonymous donor who had financed the lighthouse's preservation for decades. We dedicate this beacon to all those who guide us home, Sarah announced to the assembled crowd, to those who keep the light burning through the darkest nights, and to those who sacrificed so others might find their way. A small bronze plaque now adorned the lighthouse entrance bearing Eleanor Matthews' name, alongside a simple inscription. I couldn't save the past, but I see the future. and it looks a lot like forgiveness. Ellie herself watched from a distance, seated on a bench overlooking the harbor. Her health had declined rapidly in the months following the confrontation, the stress of that night accelerating conditions that had been developing for years. But her mind remained sharp, her determination undiminished. James Sullivan joined her, lowering himself to the bench with the careful movements of a man whose battlefield injuries reminded him of their existence daily. "Quite a ceremony," he observed. "The governor came, 2 senators, even media coverage." "Harborview isn't used to attention," Ellie replied. "It feels foreign to them being recognized for something other than lobster." "Recognition has its benefits. Federal funding, security upgrades, that new Veterans Center they're building downtown." "Sarah's idea," Ellie said with evident pride. "She convinced the Valle it would be more effective than having veterans travel 2 hours to Portland." They sat in companionable silence, watching boats navigate the harbor entrance in the golden afternoon light. From this distance, the restored town showed few signs of the violence that had nearly destroyed it. Buildings had been repaired, infrastructure strengthened, community bonds reinforced through shared crisis and recovery. "Have you heard from Ryan?" Ellie asked finally. James nodded. "Protective custody at a federal facility in Colorado. His testimony has led to 37 arrests across 12 states. Weapons caches seized. Attack plans neutralized. And Derek? Witness protection. Last I heard, he was working with veteran outreach programs somewhere in the Pacific Northwest." A small smile lifted the corners of Ellie's mouth. "Still helping others heal. Like someone else I know." The Lighthouse Journal Therapy Program had expanded since the crisis, now officially recognized by the VA as an alternative treatment for combat-related PTSD. Veterans from across New England traveled to Harborview to work with the team of therapists Sarah had assembled, each trained in Ellie's methodology of using written narrative to process battlefield trauma. "I received a letter," Ellie said, reaching into her sweater pocket, "from Ryan. The prison censors approved it last week." She handed James a single sheet of paper, covered in the same neat, disciplined handwriting that had characterized Michael Blackwood's journal, the son unconsciously emulating his father's formal script. James read it silently, his weathered face revealing nothing. When he finished, he returned it with careful respect. "He's found his father at last," he observed. "The real man, not the symbol he created. And perhaps himself as well." Ellie returned the letter to her pocket. "We can never fully escape the echoes of war, James. They shape us, haunt us sometimes, destroy us. But occasionally, they lead us home," he finished. As sunset approached, Ellie rose with James's assistance. Together they walked slowly toward the lighthouse, where Sarah waited to escort her grandmother to the honor seat for the evening's dedication ceremony. Above them, the beacon began its nightly rotation, sweeping across land and sea in its eternal vigilance. Within its beam, the past and present momentarily aligned: remembrance and renewal, loss and recovery, the wounds of war and the long, difficult path toward healing. For Ellie Matthews, who had spent a lifetime navigating that path, the light represented not just memorial, but possibility, the enduring human capacity to find meaning beyond tragedy, to forge connection from conflict, to transform the echoes of violence into affirmations of life. Some battles never truly end, but some echoes at last begin to fade. The lighthouse stands, renewed, its beams sweeping across Harborview with the same steady rhythm it has maintained for generations. But the light it casts now illuminates a different world. 4 decades of silence broken, a vendetta transformed into redemption. Old warriors who came to fight one last battle discovered instead the courage to heal. Each carried their private war for so long in carefully maintained lighthouses, in leather-bound journals, and motorcycle gangs built on misplaced rage. Eleanor Matthews knew from the beginning what took others a lifetime to learn: that saving lives means more than just preventing death. Sometimes it means bearing witness to the wounds that never close, guiding others through darkness until they find their own way home. The veterans who now walk these shores carry visible and invisible scars. They write their nightmares into journals, transforming chaos into narrative, trauma into meaning. Their stories echo across generations, not as curses passed from father to son, but as hard-won wisdom. Some say time heals all wounds. Perhaps the truth is, gentler time gives us the distance to see our scars as something other than disfigurement, as proof that we survived. As Eleanor watches the sun set on Harbor View one last time, she wonders, aren't we all just lighthouse keepers, tending beacons for those still lost at sea?